My name is Clarice Holloway, and 6 months ago, I woke up in a hospital bed with a tube in my throat and betrayal in my heart. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't even blink properly, but I could hear everything. And what I heard shattered what little peace I had left. My son, Aaron, was standing at the foot of my bed, whispering angrily on the phone. "She's still breathing. I don't know what to do if she wakes up." That sentence, just that, burned itself into my mind like acid etching glass. I had always believed Aaron was good, decent, and kind. His wife, Tasha, not so much. But never in my worst nightmares did I think he could speak of me like I was some burden he needed to dispose of. I'd raised him alone after his father died, working double shifts as a nurse so he could attend college without loans. And now here I was, tubes in my arms, alone in a coma, hearing my son plan for a future that didn't include me. If you have a similar story about betrayal from the people you least expect, tell us in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. It all started 3 weeks before my stroke, which the doctors would later say was stress-induced. The irony of that diagnosis was too cruel. Aaron and Tasha had invited me to dinner at their newly remodeled home, claiming it was a thank you for helping them with their down payment. I brought a bottle of wine and a new sweater for their daughter, Lila, my only grandchild. The table was set with the kind of precision that screamed performance, not comfort. "Mom, we were actually hoping to talk to you about something," Aaron said halfway through the meal, not meeting my eyes. Tasha jumped in too quickly. "You know that little house you own? The one in Willow Creek?" My hand froze on the stem of my wine glass. "What about it?" I asked, though I already had a sinking feeling. Aaron cleared his throat. "We were wondering if you'd consider transferring the deed into our name now, while you're still healthy." I remember blinking at them like I hadn't heard right. That little house in Willow Creek was all I had. My retirement plan, my safety net, my sanctuary. I'd bought it after Aaron's father died, scraping together every penny to put down a deposit. Over the years, I'd resisted every urge to sell it, even when times got tough. "Why would I do that?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "We just think it makes sense," Tasha said sweetly, with that hollow smile she always wore. "We'd take care of it, and you could still live there as long as you want." I wasn't born yesterday. I'd worked in elder care long enough to know how these stories ended. People signed away their homes, and then suddenly they weren't welcome anymore. I didn't argue with them that night. I just smiled, changed the subject, and excused myself early. But something had shifted. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Helen McGrady, and asked her to add a clause to my will. Under no circumstances was the house to be transferred before my death. I also updated my medical directives, just in case. The paranoia felt uncomfortable, but necessary. I didn't tell Aaron what I'd done, but I stopped visiting as often. When I did come over, Tasha would always ask if I'd given any more thought to their proposal. I always gave the same answer: my house is not up for discussion. One night, I overheard Aaron telling Lila, "Grandma's just being difficult. We'll figure something out." I thought I knew what that meant. I was wrong. It was worse. The stroke hit me while I was in the kitchen, fixing myself a cup of tea. One moment I was humming to the radio, the next I was on the floor, unable to move. The teapot screeched and steamed while my face mashed against the cold tile. I don't remember much after that. Just flashes of light, the roar of ambulance sirens, and then darkness. And then awareness. A slow, creeping sense that I was awake inside a broken body. The machines beeped steadily, and I learned to listen. To the nurses, the doctors, and, unfortunately, to Aaron. "She might not wake up," he told one of them. "But if she does, we'll cross that bridge then." He didn't sound scared. He sounded inconvenienced. They moved me to a long-term care ward after 3 weeks. I remained unresponsive, but inside I was screaming, trapped in a shell of flesh that wouldn't obey. I heard them discussing feeding tubes, power of attorney, and what to do with my house. Apparently, Helen had refused to speak to Aaron without a court order. "She's made everything so complicated," Tasha muttered one day beside my bed. "We should have pushed harder when she could still sign." That night I cried. Not because I was scared of dying. I cried because I realized my own son would have preferred it. But then something strange happened. One afternoon, a nurse named Diane came in and sat beside me longer than usual. "Your son's not been around much lately," she said softly as she wiped my forehead. "But someone's been calling every day asking about you. A woman named Becca." Becca. My former neighbor, now living 2 states away. I'd helped her through her divorce, taking care of her kids when she worked late shifts. I didn't even know she still had my number. She asked if she could visit. I told her visiting hours were strict, but she's persistent. I wanted to scream yes, to beg Diane to let her come. Diane patted my hand gently. "Don't worry, honey. I have a feeling she's coming anyway." The next morning, I heard heels clicking down the hallway. Confident, unhurried steps. Then the door opened, and Becca's voice, sharp and clear, cut through the stale hospital air. "Clarice Holloway, if you're in there, you better hang on, because I'm not letting you go like this." She sat beside me and grasped my hand like it was an anchor. "I don't know what's been going on, but I spoke to your lawyer, and something stinks." Becca's hand was warm, strong, real. I felt a tear slip down my cheek. Her breath caught. "Clarice, did you just—" Her fingers gripped tighter. "Okay, I'm not imagining that. You're in there, aren't you?" Yes. Yes, I was. Becca didn't stop visiting after that first day. In fact, she came every afternoon, like clockwork. She brought peppermint lotion for my hands, a small radio that played jazz, and a scarf I'd once complimented years ago. She spoke to me like I could answer, never once treating me like I was a lost cause. The nurses started noticing the change, small but undeniable. My eyelids fluttered more. My hand would twitch when she held it, and once I managed to let out a sound that wasn't quite a word, but wasn't just breath either. Diane reported the changes to the attending physician, but he was cautious. "These things can be involuntary," he said, writing something down on my chart. Becca wasn't having it. "Involuntary, my foot," she snapped. "Clarice has more fight in her pinky than most people do in their whole bodies." And that was when the tide began to turn. Slowly, painfully, but turn it did. The day I managed to open both eyes for 3 seconds, Becca cried like a child. She leaned so close I could smell her lemon shampoo and whispered, "I knew you were in there, you stubborn old bird." Her joy was contagious. Diane clapped her hands and called the doctor over. I couldn't speak yet, couldn't move more than my fingers and eyelids, but I could listen and I could think. And what I thought about most was Aaron and the things he'd said. He hadn't visited in 2 weeks, and neither had Tasha. When the doctor called to update him on my condition, he allegedly, quote, couldn't take the call due to work. But I remembered the way he'd talked about me when he thought I couldn't hear. I remembered every word. Becca had heard none of it, but I would never forget. One afternoon, Becca arrived with a thick manila folder tucked under her arm. She placed it gently on the tray beside my bed and said, "I did some digging." Her voice was quiet, laced with fury barely kept in check. I couldn't shake the feeling something was off, so I went to the county records office. Inside the folder were copies of property documents, notarized forms, and emails between Tasha and a shady real estate agent. "They tried to sell your Willow Creek house, Clarice. They actually listed it behind your back using forged paperwork." My heart thundered in my chest, even as my body lay motionless. "Your lawyer caught it just in time," Becca continued. "She flagged it and had the deed frozen through an emergency court order. I wanted to scream, to cry, to rage, but all I could do was blink rapidly, over and over." Becca nodded solemnly. "I know, honey, I know." Diane was the first to notice my signals were consistent. "She's blinking twice when she hears something upsetting," she told the neurologist during rounds. "And when I say Becca's name, she holds eye contact longer than normal." They ordered another round of cognitive response tests, and this time I passed the ones I could, blinking on command, following light, reacting to music. "She's in there," the neurologist finally said, turning to Becca. "We'll start speech and physical therapy immediately." Becca squeezed my hand so tight, I thought she might never let go. That night, alone in my room, I stared at the ceiling and let hope settle into my chest like warm water. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was preparing to rise. Physical therapy was agony, but it was agony I embraced like a friend. Muscles that had atrophied screamed back to life, and my throat ached from the effort of sound. It took days before I could make a single coherent noise, and even then, it was just a raspy, broken "beh." Becca wept when she heard it. "Say it again," she whispered, her face inches from mine. I couldn't. Not yet, but she understood what I'd meant. The nurses began calling me a miracle, and even the jaded neurologist smiled more often. Diane brought in flashcards and began helping me spell with my fingers until speech caught up. And through it all, Becca was there. Guardian angel, avenging warrior, unrelenting friend. When Aaron finally reappeared, it was on a Thursday morning without warning or ceremony. He walked into the room holding a coffee he didn't offer me and a fake smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, would you look at that?" he said, as if I were a pet dog who'd learned a new trick. "You're awake, that's good." I stared at him, stone-faced, my throat too sore to speak, yet but my mind sharp as ever. He sat beside the bed and looked around nervously, clearly unaware of how much I knew. "Tasha sends her best. She's been so busy with Lila and—" He stopped when Becca walked in. Her eyes locked on his, no warmth in them at all. "Get out," she said plainly, no inflection, just steel. Aaron blinked, unsure if she was joking. "Excuse me?" he asked, still trying to act like the concerned son. "She doesn't want to see you," Becca said, walking between him and my bed like a shield. "You've done enough damage already. You only showed up when you heard she might be able to testify." Aaron laughed nervously. "Testify? Against who?" "What are you even talking about?" Becca opened the manila folder again and slid the forged documents across the tray table. "These. You know, the fake forms you and your wife tried to use to sell her house?" Aaron's face drained of color, the coffee cup slipping from his fingers and landing with a thud. This isn't what you think," he stammered, "but it was exactly what we thought, and more." I tried to speak then, tried to force words from a throat still raw, but all I managed was a whisper. Becca leaned close, urging me on. "You've got this, Clarice. Say it." My lips trembled as I formed the word, weak but undeniable. "Out." Aaron froze. "Mom." I met his eyes, filled with a coldness he'd never seen from me before. "Get out." It wasn't loud, but it was final. He stood slowly, confused, defeated, and slipped out the door without another word. After he left, Becca sat beside me in silence. She didn't need to say anything. I could feel her pride, her support, her belief in me humming like electricity in the room. Diane came in and whispered, "You've got everyone talking, Clarice." The woman who came back from the dead with fire in her eyes. I wasn't dead. Not even close. My body had failed me, but my spirit had not. And now, every twitch of muscle, every spoken word, was another step toward reclaiming what was mine. I wasn't done. I was just getting started. News of my awakening spread fast, though not everyone was thrilled to hear it. Tasha didn't visit, not once, not even out of pretend concern. Instead, she sent Aaron back 2 days later with a box of chocolates and a sheepish grin, like we could all pretend nothing had happened. Becca met him at the door again, arms crossed, ready for war. "You left your mother alone in a coma for weeks," she said flatly, her voice colder than the hospital tiles. "You stood right there and called her a problem you didn't know how to get rid of." Aaron looked around nervously, as if the walls might close in. "I didn't mean it like that," he mumbled, trying to smile. "We were scared, okay? The doctors didn't think she'd make it, and we just—" His voice trailed off as I turned my head, slowly, deliberately, away from him. The room filled with silence, too loud for any excuse to live inside. That day, I took my first steps with the walker, each one an act of rebellion against everything they'd wished for me. Diane cried harder than I did, and Becca whooped like we'd just won the lottery. My legs trembled, my knees ached, but I moved forward anyway. 10 feet, the therapist announced proudly, making a note on his clipboard. "We'll be walking to the elevator in no time." Every footstep was another line in the story I would one day tell, not just about betrayal, but about survival. Becca whispered in my ear that night, "You're coming back faster than anyone expected." I blinked once for yes, my throat still recovering from the damage. She squeezed my hand and said, "They're not ready for you, but they're going to learn." I nodded slightly, and for the first time in weeks I felt like myself again. Helen McGrady came to visit 2 days later, crisp in her gray suit and carrying her signature leather briefcase. She smiled when she saw me sitting up without help, my hand steady around a warm cup of tea. "You've always been full of surprises, Clarice," she said, settling into the chair beside my bed. "I've already filed charges against the real estate agent who tried to process the forged documents." She opened the briefcase and pulled out a folder marked with a red tab. "And I've frozen all property activity related to your estate until a full investigation is completed." I blinked twice, then managed a hoarse, "Thank you." Helen smiled. "You're not alone in this. I've worked with families like yours before, but rarely have I seen someone fight their way back with this much grit." Becca leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Aaron and Tasha need to be held accountable. They didn't just lie, they planned this." Helen nodded gravely and slid another document across the table. "This is a revocation of power of attorney," she explained. "Technically, Aaron still holds medical authority over you because of the paperwork you filed years ago." My breath caught, and Becca's face twisted in disbelief. "He still has legal control?" she asked, furious. "Only temporarily," Helen reassured us. "You're competent now, and once you sign this, his authority ends immediately." I picked up the pen with shaking hands and scrawled my name across the line. It wasn't neat, but it was mine. Becca clapped softly, and Helen slid the paper back into her folder with a nod. "There. You're officially back in charge of your own life." For the first time since waking, I felt the weight of helplessness begin to lift. That weekend, Lila came to visit, alone, awkward, and clutching a crumpled drawing of sunflowers. She stood in the doorway for a long time before finally tiptoeing in and whispering, "Grandma?" I blinked and reached for her hand, surprised by how warm and small it felt. "Daddy said you were too sick to talk," she added, looking guilty. I tried to speak, but only managed a raspy, "I'm okay now." Her face brightened like sunrise. "I missed you. Mommy said you might never come back." I didn't know how much she understood, but I knew she was innocent in all this. I nodded once and pulled her hand to my chest. "I love you," I mouthed. And even if she didn't hear the words, I think she felt them. Aaron returned 2 days later with Tasha in tow, both of them wearing matching masks of concern. Tasha brought flowers and set them on the windowsill like a peace offering. "We're so glad you're getting better, Clarice," she said, her voice sweetened with artificial sugar. I watched her like a hawk, studying every word, every movement. Aaron tried to explain away the forged documents. "It was a mistake," he claimed. "The agent misunderstood what we wanted." Becca, seated beside me, didn't even pretend to be polite. "The agent had notarized forms with Clarice's forged signature," she snapped. "That's not a misunderstanding. It's fraud." Helen had already briefed the authorities, and now they were under investigation for attempted theft. The look on Tasha's face when she realized I wasn't the powerless old woman she'd hoped for was worth every ounce of pain I'd endured. They left quickly, excuses crumbling, promises trailing behind them like smoke. I didn't stop them, didn't scream or curse. I didn't need to. My silence was louder than anything they could say. Diane came in after they were gone and said, "You're becoming famous around here. Everyone's talking about the comeback queen in room 214. I gave her a small smile and gestured for the walker. "Ready to walk?" she asked, surprised. I nodded. Today I would go farther than 10 feet. I would reach the hallway window and look out over the garden, because I was not only reclaiming my body, I was reclaiming my future. By the end of the week, I could walk unassisted for several minutes, and my voice returned in short, breathy phrases. Becca helped me practice speaking again, reading aloud from old poetry books she'd found in the hospital library. I recited lines between sips of lukewarm broth, words cracking but growing stronger. "Do not go gentle into that good night," I rasped one afternoon. Becca chuckled. "That's you, all right." Diane nodded in agreement. "You didn't go gentle. You came back with teeth." I felt the laughter build in my chest and let it out, small and gravelly, but real. The nurses clapped when I made it down the hallway without stopping once. Each step was a quiet rebellion against every plan Aaron and Tasha had made. The hospital staff began preparing for my discharge. Helen had arranged a temporary caregiver and secured the Willow Creek house against any future threats. Becca offered to stay with me for the first week, and I accepted with tearful gratitude. I wasn't the same woman who'd entered this hospital. I had been buried alive in a body that wouldn't move, surrounded by voices that thought I couldn't hear. But now I could move. I could speak, and most importantly, I could fight back. I stared out the window at the afternoon sky and whispered a promise to myself. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. If you're still listening to my story, please take a moment to subscribe. It only takes a few seconds for you, but it makes a big difference for me. Returning to the Willow Creek house was like stepping back into my own skin. The door creaked just the same. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon polish, and the quilt on the armchair still had the fold marks from the last time I'd laid it there. Becca helped me in slowly, letting me place each foot like it mattered, because it did. Every step inside this house was a declaration. I'm still here, and this is still mine. The walls, the floors, the tiny chipped tile by the sink, I hadn't realized how much comfort they held until I'd nearly lost them. "Welcome home," Becca whispered as she set down my overnight bag. I nodded, swallowing a wave of emotion I wasn't ready to show. She walked me to the sofa, where a vase of wildflowers sat like a silent celebration. "I thought you'd want something real," she said. "Plastic arrangements don't belong in houses like this." That night, I didn't sleep much, not because of pain, but because of the thoughts that wouldn't stop circling. I lay under my own roof, listening to the wind tapping branches against the window, wondering how long it would take to feel safe again. Even though Helen had filed all the paperwork to secure my property, and the locks had been changed, my sense of security wasn't so easily restored. It wasn't the house I didn't trust. It was the people who had once filled it with laughter. My family had become strangers, and I had become a stranger to myself. Becca slept in the guest room, her door slightly ajar in case I needed her. The gesture reminded me of nights I used to leave Aaron's door cracked open when he had nightmares. I wondered if he remembered those things now, or if money had wiped his memory clean. Grief isn't always about death. Sometimes it's about realizing the person you loved never really existed. By morning, the sun poured through the kitchen window like honey, slow and golden. I shuffled to the counter, wrapped in my robe, and reached for the tea canister by memory. The kettle hissed and rattled, the sound grounding me more than any therapy session ever had. Becca walked in yawning, rubbing her eyes, and smiled when she saw me upright and busy. "Look at you," she said. "Next thing I know, you'll be baking pies and repainting the front porch." I smiled back, my voice still husky but firmer now. "Maybe next week," I said. We sat at the table like we had 100 mornings before my coma, as if nothing had happened and everything had happened. The familiarity was healing, but beneath the calm, something simmered. Unfinished business that needed facing. 2 days later, Helen arrived with a file thicker than my old nursing manuals. She laid it on the table with a sigh, brushing crumbs off her skirt before sitting down. "Clarice," she said, "you're in the clear for now, legally speaking. The DA is moving forward with investigating the forgery, and your son and daughter-in-law are currently listed as persons of interest." I nodded slowly, listening more to her tone than her words. "But there's something else," she added, sliding a photo across the table. It was a snapshot of Aaron and Tasha, standing outside a downtown bank, envelopes in hand. "They've opened a trust account in Lila's name," Helen said. "It's not illegal, but it's suspicious, especially considering the amount deposited just days after they tried to forge your deed." Becca leaned in, frowning. "You think they're laundering it?" Helen shrugged. "I think they're planning something worse." That afternoon, I sat on the porch and stared down the quiet street, thinking about Lila. That little girl with the sunflower drawing didn't deserve to be caught in this storm. She wasn't to blame for her parents, greed, their lies, or their cruelty. But children learn what they're taught, and I feared what kind of lessons Tasha was feeding her now. I remembered the soft weight of Lila's hand in mine, and the way her eyes lit up when I'd said, "I'm okay." I had to find a way to reach her again, to protect her, even if it meant crossing a line I never thought I would. "Becca," I said softly, "I want to see my granddaughter." She looked up from the porch railing, surprised. "You sure?" I nodded. "Before they poison her completely." We didn't go to their house. That would have been foolish. Instead, Becca called the school and arranged to meet Lila during lunch, using her emergency contact rights I'd granted her years ago. I wasn't legally allowed to take Lila without parental permission, but no one could stop me from talking to her. When she came into the cafeteria, her eyes widened with shock and then joy. "Grandma!" she shouted, running to me like the months had melted away. I knelt, aching but steady, and held her tight. "I missed you, baby," I whispered into her hair. "Mommy said you were sleeping forever," she mumbled. "But I knew you weren't." I told her you were just resting until you came back to fix everything. Becca and I exchanged glances. Maybe we had less time than we thought. The school called Tasha after our visit, and by evening, my phone rang with her number blinking like a warning light. I let it go to voicemail. Helen had advised I record everything now. Becca listened with me on speaker. "Clarice?" Tasha's voice snapped. "How dare you show up at Lila's school without permission? You lost that right the minute you started accusing us of things you can't prove. If you keep interfering, I will file for a restraining order. Do you hear me? Stay away." Her voice cracked at the end, betraying the calm she was faking. Becca looked at me and whispered, "That's not the voice of someone in control. That's someone who's scared." I stared at the phone, my resolve hardening like glass under flame. That weekend, we held a small gathering at my house, just the neighbors, Diane from the hospital, and Helen. They all knew bits and pieces of what had happened, but I wanted them to hear it from me. I stood in my living room, voice still fragile, hands trembling only slightly. "I was awake the whole time," I said. "In the coma, in the hospital bed, I heard everything." Gasps filled the room, but no one interrupted. "Aaron and Tasha tried to steal my house. They tried to erase me from my own life." Diane covered her mouth. Helen nodded solemnly. "And I'm telling you now, I won't be erased." As they left one by one, every guest hugged me a little tighter than before. Diane whispered, "You're stronger than anyone I've ever met." Helen squeezed my shoulder and said, "We're going to make sure justice happens." Becca stood beside me as the porch light flickered on and dusk settled over Willow Creek. "What now?" she asked. I took a deep breath, the air cool in my healing lungs. "Now we watch, we wait, and we prepare." Because I knew in my bones. Aaron and Tasha weren't done yet. But neither was I. 3 days later, I received an envelope with no return address slipped quietly into my mailbox sometime between Becca's morning coffee and my physical therapy walk. The paper inside was thick and expensive, the kind that pretends importance while concealing rot. I opened it slowly, hands steady despite the pit in my stomach, and found a formal letter from a lawyer I'd never heard of. It was a petition for conservatorship. Aaron was trying to gain legal authority over my finances and medical decisions again. I stared at the page, barely blinking, as Becca read over my shoulder and let out a low, furious curse. "He's really doing it," she whispered. "After everything. After the forgery, after abandoning you, after you came back from the dead." I turned and met her eyes, voice quiet but full of steel. "He wants me gone, Becca. One way or another." We drove straight to Helen's office that afternoon, and she wasted no time flipping through the petition with growing disgust. "This is a coordinated move," she said, tapping the page where Aaron claimed I was mentally deteriorating. "They're painting a narrative, starting with your visit to Lila. They'll argue you're unstable, that your recovery is incomplete, that you're confused or impulsive." Becca paced the office like a storm in a bottle. "So they lie, and she has to defend herself all over again?" Helen nodded grimly. "Unfortunately, yes. The court has to take conservatorship requests seriously, especially if they come from family." I sat very still, feeling the chill of betrayal seep deeper into my bones. I'd seen this happen to patients in my nursing days. Women who'd survived strokes or memory loss, only to have their agency stolen by greedy relatives. But I was not going to be one of them. Helen began gathering documentation immediately, The competency evaluations from the hospital, therapy progress reports, letters from Diane and the neurologist, even Becca's written testimony. "We need to be proactive," Helen said. "If we wait until the hearing, they'll ambush you with accusations." I nodded, and for the first time in weeks, my voice didn't waver. "Let's bury them in truth before they bury me in lies." Becca clapped her hands once, sharply. "That's the Clarice I know." We also arranged for an independent psychiatric evaluation at Helen's suggestion, something neutral, thorough, and court-admissible. The doctor, a woman named Dr. Sandhu, was kind but firm during our sessions, asking questions that ranged from math problems to memory recall to philosophical opinions on aging. At the end of our third session, she closed her notebook and smiled. "You're more mentally fit than half the people who walk into my office," she said. "And twice as stubborn." I laughed, really laughed, and for a moment, I felt 20 years younger. Aaron called the next day, leaving a voicemail laced with guilt and manufactured concern. "Mom, we just want what's best for you. This isn't an attack. It's a safety precaution. Things have been moving so fast, we're worried you're not thinking clearly." Becca listened with narrowed eyes, arms crossed, jaw tight. "He's already building his case," she said. "He's trying to create a breadcrumb trail of fake concern." I played the message again, this time jotting down every phrase that hinted at manipulation. "He's careful," I murmured, "always has been, says the right thing with the wrong motive." But I wasn't afraid. I was ready to fight, not just for my house or my rights, but for my name. The hearing date arrived 2 weeks later, held in a small courtroom with beige walls and an overworked judge who looked like he hadn't smiled since the Clinton administration. Aaron sat across from me in a navy suit he couldn't afford without my help, Tasha beside him in a demure beige dress she clearly thought made her look innocent. Helen stood next to me, polished and unreadable, while Becca sat behind us like a silent thundercloud. "Mrs. Holloway," the judge said, glancing at my file, "you're contesting your son's petition for conservatorship?" I rose slowly but steadily, my cane in one hand and resolve in the other. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm contesting it with every ounce of strength I have left." Aaron shifted uncomfortably. "We're just trying to protect her," he said. "She's been through so much. We think she's confused." Helen cleared her throat. "If the court will permit, I have expert documentation that says otherwise." Over the next hour, Helen presented the reports. Drive, Sandhu's evaluation, letters from the hospital staff, sworn statements from Diane and the neurologist. The judge read in silence, flipping through the pages with a furrowed brow. "These are quite thorough," he muttered. "Impressive recovery, Mrs. Holloway." Helen stepped aside so I could speak. I took the stand and looked directly at my son, no fear, no tears, just truth. "I heard you in the hospital," I said clearly. "Every word. You thought I couldn't hear, but I did. You said you didn't know what to do if I woke up." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Is that true, Mr. Holloway?" Aaron stammered, caught off guard. "That's not. She's remembering wrong. She was in a coma." "I was in a coma," I said calmly. "Not dead. My brain was trapped, but it was listening. You and your wife tried to sell my house using forged documents. You tried to disappear me because I refused to give you what you felt entitled to." Tasha looked away, her composure cracking just slightly. Helen handed over copies of the recorded voicemail and the property fraud filings. "We've also opened a fraud investigation, Your Honor," she added. "This conservatorship petition is not about concern. It's about control." The courtroom was quiet enough to hear the judge's pen clicking. He sighed deeply and looked at Aaron like a disappointed schoolteacher. "Mr. Holloway, this court finds insufficient cause to grant your request for conservatorship. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the district attorney for review of potential criminal conduct." Aaron turned pale, Tasha gasped, and Becca finally exhaled. Outside the courthouse, Helen shook my hand firmly and said, "You won today. But they won't stop, not if there's still money left to chase." I nodded, eyes focused on the horizon. "Then we keep fighting until they're out of places to hide." Becca linked her arm through mine as we walked down the courthouse steps, cane tapping rhythmically against the stone. "Clarice Holloway," she said, "you just torched their entire house of lies." I didn't smile. I didn't need to, because justice wasn't just a feeling anymore, it was a fact. The morning after the court hearing, I found myself staring at the window while the kettle boiled, trying to process the quiet. There was no hospital monitor beeping, no muffled legal arguments through paper-thin walls, no knock from a nurse checking vitals, just wind tapping the glass. It should have felt like peace, but it didn't. It felt like the moment right before a second wave hits the shore. Becca came downstairs with her hair still wet from the shower and paused when she saw me at the window. "You didn't sleep," she said, not asking, just knowing. I shook my head slowly and whispered, "They are going to retaliate." Becca sat across from me, folding her hands like a lawyer waiting for cross-examination. "Then we stay ready." I poured the tea, hands steady, heart less so. I'm tired of being ready. I want to be ahead. That afternoon, I asked Helen to come over, not to talk about court or fraud, but about legacy. I wanted a new will drawn up, a trust created, and every loophole closed. "I'm not dying anytime soon," I told her, "but if I do, it won't be because someone shoved me out of the way to get their hands on a house they didn't build." She smiled like she did when I first met her, respectfully and just a little impressed. "Do you want Lila included?" she asked carefully. I nodded. "Yes, but not through her parents. The fund should be locked in a trust she can only access at 25, with oversight from a third-party administrator." Helen jotted notes quickly, every stroke of her pen a step toward my control. "And the house?" "It goes to a local women's shelter after I pass. I want it to become a sanctuary, not a target." Becca exhaled softly. "Clarice, that's beautiful." The legal steps moved faster this time, aided by the clear paper trail Aaron and Tasha had left in their greed. Helen made sure every document was double notarized, filed in duplicate, and protected under layers of legal shielding. "They'll need a miracle and a magician to undo this," she told me as she filed the last set of papers. But legal armor wasn't enough. The emotional toll of betrayal doesn't vanish with a signature. Some days, I would pass the photos on my hallway wall. Aaron as a toddler in overalls, a handmade card from his kindergarten graduation, and I'd feel that old grief pull at my ribs. "You didn't just lose a house," Becca told me one evening. "You lost the idea of your son." I didn't argue. She was right. But knowing the truth didn't make it any easier to live with it. Then, a week after the court hearing, the next blow arrived, not from Aaron or Tasha, but from the Department of Child Services. A woman named Rachel Morris knocked on my door, badge clipped to her blazer, clipboard in hand. "I'm following up on a welfare complaint regarding your recent contact with your granddaughter," she said. I blinked, stunned. "Someone filed a complaint?" "Yes," she replied, voice even but not unkind. "The caller alleged that you may be exerting inappropriate influence over Lila, possibly causing emotional distress." Becca appeared in the doorway, jaw tight. "You have got to be kidding," Rachel sighed. "I'm sorry. I have to investigate all claims, no matter how unfounded." I invited Rachel inside and offered her tea while Becca hovered in silent fury. "I'm sure this came from my son or daughter-in-law," I told her plainly. "They've been trying to isolate me from Lila since my coma." Rachel took notes, but her eyes softened. "It wouldn't be the first time I've seen family weaponize the system." I showed her letters from my doctor and therapist affirming my mental fitness, then told her about the court case, the fraud investigation, and the trust documents. Rachel was quiet for a long time afterward. "She loves her granddaughter," Becca finally said, breaking the silence. "And she's the only stable adult Lila has right now." Rachel stood and nodded. "I believe you, but I'll still have to speak to Lila and file a report." "Do what you must," I said. "We've got nothing to hide." 3 days later, Rachel returned with a closed file and a smile that actually reached her eyes this time. "No evidence of emotional distress," she said. "Lila lit up when she talked about you. Drew another picture, too." She handed it to me, a crayon sketch of me and Lila holding sunflowers, the house in the background with Grandma's safe place, written in shaky block letters. I pressed it to my chest and held it there for a long moment. "Thank you," I whispered, "for doing your job with compassion." Rachel nodded. "Just make sure you keep copies of everything. I don't think this is the last time they'll try something." Becca muttered under her breath, No, they're cockroaches. They don't stop until you turn the lights on. I folded the drawing carefully and placed it on my mantel. Despite everything, I called Aaron one last time, not out of hope, but necessity. I needed him to hear me clearly, without lawyers, without courtrooms, without walls. He answered on the third ring, voice tight and defensive. "What do you want?" "To say this once, and only once," I replied. "Stay away from me, stay away from my house. And if you ever involve Lila in your games again, I will make it my life's mission to see you never touch another dollar I've ever earned." Silence. Then a low, bitter laugh. "You think you've won?" "I didn't win anything," I said coldly. "I survived. You just lost whatever pieces of me you hadn't already broken." That night, I sat outside on the porch with Becca, the silence between us warm rather than heavy. The crickets sang, the wind rustled the trees, and the stars blinked above like quiet witnesses. "Do you think he ever loved me?" I asked her. Becca didn't answer right away. "Maybe. But love isn't just a feeling, Clarice. It's how you treat someone when they can't give you anything back." I nodded slowly. "Then I guess he stopped loving me the minute I needed him most." She put her hand over mine. "Then he never really did. But I do. And for once, that felt like enough. If you're still listening to my story, please take a moment to subscribe. It only takes a few seconds for you, but it makes a big difference for me. A month passed, and for a while, things were quiet. Almost suspiciously so. Becca returned home to manage her own life, but promised to visit every weekend without fail. Diane came by every Thursday with lemon cake and gossip from the hospital, making me laugh so hard my sides ached. The Willow Creek house no longer felt like a battleground, but a place of healing. The air lighter, the shadows retreating. I resumed my daily walks to the corner cafe, nodding at neighbors who now looked at me with respect rather than pity. I even started a journal, recording everything. Not just what happened, but how it made me feel. Writing gave me power, a way to reclaim the narrative that others had tried to hijack. And Lila began sending letters. Actual letters, scribbled in her favorite pink gel pen, full of stories about school, books, and her secret wish to visit me again. I kept them in a carved wooden box on my nightstand, next to my reading glasses and will. Each letter reminded me why I'd fought so hard to live. Then came the phone call that shattered the silence. Lila's teacher, Ems? Avery, sounding unsure and deeply worried. "I probably shouldn't be calling," she said, "but I thought you should know. Lila's been falling asleep in class, and when I asked why, she said her parents argue all night long." I gripped the phone tighter, heart racing, the old nurse in me snapping awake. "Did she say anything else?" "Only that Mommy keeps saying it's all her fault, and Daddy said something about no more chances." Becca, who had just arrived for her weekend visit, saw the color drain from my face. I relayed the conversation word for word, and by the time I finished, she already had her keys in hand. "We're not waiting," she said. "We're checking on her." I didn't argue. Because this time, silence could cost more than property. It could cost a child. We drove across town, the weight between us heavier than any courtroom testimony or hospital monitor beep. Tasha's car was gone, but Aaron's truck was in the driveway, crooked like he'd parked in a rush. The curtains were drawn, and no lights were on, despite the early dusk outside. Becca knocked firmly, 3 times, and waited. When no one answered, she knocked again. Louder this time. "Aaron," she called. "It's Clarice and Becca. We're not here to fight. We just want to see Lila." After a long pause, the door creaked open an inch, revealing Aaron's tired, red-rimmed eyes. He looked thinner, like life had been chipping away at him piece by piece. "She's not here," he said hoarsely. "Tasha took her to her sister's." I didn't believe him for a second. "Then tell us why Miss Avery is calling about her falling asleep in class," I said evenly, stepping closer to the door. Becca moved in beside me, arms crossed, eyes like steel. Aaron looked down, avoiding both of us. "We've been under a lot of pressure," he mumbled. "Tasha's been unstable. Ever since the court hearing, she's been blaming Lila for everything." My throat tightened. "Blaming her for what, exactly?" He leaned his head against the doorframe, like it was the only thing holding him up. For losing the case. For losing you. It hit me like a slap, the sick truth of it. Tasha saw Lila's love for me as betrayal. Becca whispered, "We need to get her out of there." Helen helped us file an emergency petition the next morning, this time for temporary guardianship. I provided the letters, Miss Avery's statement, and a signed affidavit from Diane outlining Tasha's aggressive behavior during my recovery. Judges don't always like to remove a child from biological parents, Helen warned, but if there's evidence of psychological harm, we have a chance. Becca didn't sleep that night, pacing the hallway while I tried and failed to rest. At 8 a.m. sharp, we stood before a tired-looking family court judge who read the packet carefully, his eyes lingering on Lila's crayon drawings. "Children see what adults hide," he murmured. "And what I see here is a little girl stuck between two sides she didn't choose." After 30 minutes, he set down the papers and looked at me. "You're her grandmother, and you've demonstrated care, stability, and integrity throughout this ordeal. Temporary guardianship granted, effective immediately, pending a full hearing." I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. We picked Lila up from school that afternoon, the principal gently ushering her into my arms with quiet understanding. "I knew you'd come," Lila whispered, her small hands gripping my coat. "I told my teacher you would." Becca knelt beside her and tucked a curl behind her ear. "You're safe now, sunshine. You're coming home with us." Lila didn't ask questions. She just nodded and held our hands tighter. In the car, she sang softly to herself, a lullaby I used to hum when she was a baby. I looked at her in the rearview mirror and saw the weight she'd been carrying. Far too heavy for someone so small. She didn't cry. She didn't smile either. But she slept the whole way home. The Willow Creek house changed overnight. Lila's laughter began to echo in the hallways, soft at first, like a song she was still learning the words to. Becca transformed the guest room into a child's haven. Sunflower decals on the walls, a bookshelf full of her favorite stories, a hand-painted sign that read, "Lila's Safe Place." Diane brought over cookies and old puzzles, and even Helen stopped by with a donation for Lila's school supplies. The community, once hesitant to intervene, began wrapping around us like a second skin. And I, who had once been silent in a hospital bed while my family plotted my disappearance, was now the shield Lila never should have had to need. I made her breakfast each morning, walked her to school, and read to her every night until her eyes fluttered shut. "You're not just back," Becca whispered one evening. "You're rising." Tasha tried to fight the guardianship, of course, showing up in court with a new lawyer and a sob story. But this time, the lies didn't stick. Lila testified via a child psychologist's written report, detailing the yelling, the name-calling, and the way Tasha blamed her for everything that had gone wrong. The court ruled in my favor, granting me full guardianship with scheduled visitations that Tasha never once attended. Aaron signed away his rights quietly, no fight left in him, no apology either. That was when I finally stopped hoping for change and accepted the truth. Some people don't grow, they just find new ways to shrink. Lila didn't ask about him anymore. I didn't bring him up. One evening, months later, as autumn leaves began to scatter across the yard, Lila climbed into my lap with a book and a question. "Grandma," she said, "did you come back because of me?" I looked into her eyes, so full of wonder and worry, and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "I came back because I wasn't finished," I told her gently. "But I stayed because of you." She nodded once, serious and satisfied, then rested her head against my chest as I read aloud. And in that moment, I understood something deeper than betrayal or even justice. I had been left alone in a coma, forgotten and discarded. But now I was exactly where I was meant to be. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. Winter came gently that year, as if the sky itself knew we needed softness. Frost kissed the windows of the Willow Creek house, but inside, everything felt warm. Lila decorated the tree with paper snowflakes and yarn ornaments, her laughter filling corners that had once echoed with silence. Becca strung popcorn garlands while Diane brought over a box of vintage glass bulbs she swore were older than television. I baked gingerbread cookies from an old recipe card, that had survived 2 floods and 1 fire, and we ate them by the fireplace in thick socks and shared peace. Every night, Lila insisted on lighting a new candle on the windowsill, so Santa knows where the love lives. I didn't correct her. I didn't need to. Her words were more than fantasy. They were truth. The house didn't just feel safe anymore. It felt sacred. But as the holidays approached, so did the shadows. Tasha's appeal. Though the court had granted me full guardianship, she was now trying to overturn it, claiming emotional manipulation and unlawful separation. Helen read the paperwork twice before speaking. She's accusing you of turning Lila against her. She's also claiming Becca has no legal authority to be around the child unsupervised. Becca scoffed. I've done nothing but help Clarice keep that little girl from turning into collateral damage. I reached for Lila's crayon drawing that hung on the fridge and handed it to Helen. If this is manipulation, I hope the whole world learns how to do it. Helen smiled thinly. It's weak, but not harmless. We'll need more than letters this time. We'll need character witnesses. The town didn't hesitate when we asked. Ms. Avery from the school offered to testify. Diane wrote a 3-page letter about Lila's transformation since coming to live with me. Even the family doctor submitted notes confirming Lila's emotional stability had improved significantly. We can build a wall of truth, Helen said, but Tasha's trying to set fire to it with her narrative. Becca nodded. Then we need to bring the rain. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed, not with reporters or spectators, but with neighbors, friends, and people who had watched this story unfold. Tasha arrived late, flanked by a new lawyer who looked barely old enough to shave. She didn't look angry this time. She looked desperate. And desperation has a way of smelling like guilt in a room full of clarity. The judge, a woman this time, read the files slowly and methodically, interrupting both sides with pointed questions. Mrs. Stevens, she said at one point, you claim this child has been manipulated, yet you've attended none of your court-ordered visits. Would you like to explain that? Tasha stammered something about scheduling conflicts and stress, but the excuse dissolved under the weight of her silence. Becca was called to the stand next, and she stood tall, hands folded calmly. I'm not Lila's blood, she said, but I've stood beside the woman who saved her. That should count for something. I was last. I didn't bring anger or pity with me. I brought truth. I nearly died, I said simply. My son and his wife left me to rot in a hospital bed. But I came back, not for revenge, but for peace. I found that peace in this little girl, who reminded me that family isn't about who shares your name. It's about who shows up. I have no interest in stealing Tasha's daughter. I have every interest in saving her from a home full of broken promises and louder anger than love. If that makes me manipulative, then so be it. The judge didn't speak for a long time. Then she closed the folder and said, Petition denied. Guardianship remains with Mrs. Holloway. Case dismissed. Outside the courthouse, I stood under a sky heavy with snow clouds, letting the cold wind rush against my cheeks. Becca wrapped an arm around my shoulders and whispered, You did it. I shook my head. We did it. All of us. Lila came running out of the building moments later, holding Helen's hand, cheeks red with cold and excitement. Can we get hot chocolate now? She asked, her voice brighter than any ruling. We all laughed, a sound full of exhaustion and relief, and Becca opened the car door with a dramatic bow. To the cafe, Princess Justice, she declared. And for once, the world didn't feel like a place where things happened to me. It felt like a place I could shape. Back at home, I tucked Lila into bed with her favorite stuffed rabbit and a new book about brave girls with impossible odds. As I read aloud, she watched me with sleepy eyes, her little fingers curled around mine. Grandma, she said quietly, are you ever going to leave again? My throat tightened. No, baby, I'm not going anywhere. She nodded once, the way children do when they're testing hope. Then she whispered, I think I like the world better when you're in it. I kissed her forehead and pulled the blankets up to her chin. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. Downstairs, Becca was waiting at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of cocoa and a question in her eyes. What now? She asked. Now that the storm's passed? I sat down across from her and took a long sip, letting the chocolate warm places even Justice couldn't reach. Now, I said. We'd build something better. Becca smiled and raised her mug. To better. But I shook my head. To beginning again. Because better still isn't enough. Outside, snow began to fall, dusting the porch steps and garden path with quiet grace. This house had seen betrayal, recovery, and justice, but it hadn't seen joy. Not yet. But it would. Spring arrived like an apology, all sunshine through lace curtains and daffodils blooming by the porch steps. Lila pressed wildflower seeds into the earth with her tiny fingers while I held the watering can steady, guiding her movements with patient hands. They'll grow strong here, she said, as if the soil knew how to protect things better now. Becca stood behind us with her phone, snapping pictures for what she jokingly called the Comeback Chronicles. I didn't mind. In fact, I found I liked the idea of documenting this new chapter, one rooted not in recovery but in renewal. Inside, the house smelled like lemon polish and fresh bread, and the bedroom that had once held silence now echoed with bedtime stories and sleepy giggles. Every routine we built felt sacred. Sunday pancakes, Thursday library trips, Friday puzzle nights. These weren't just habits, they were anchors. And though the past hadn't vanished, it had stopped stealing from the present. One evening, I found a letter tucked into Lila's backpack, clearly written by Erin in rushed, uneven handwriting. It wasn't formal, not something prepared for a lawyer or a judge, just a piece of lined paper folded into thirds. I sat on the porch alone to read it, the wind nudging the corners like even the air wanted to peek. "Mom," it began, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't think I could forgive me, but I want you to know I'm sorry, not just for what I did, but for what I became. Tasha's gone. She left 2 weeks ago and didn't say where she was going. I'm in debt, the house is a wreck, and I haven't seen Lila smile in months. I think I let fear make me someone you wouldn't recognize. I don't want anything from you. Just maybe tell Lila I miss her." I folded the letter, not angrily, not tenderly, just quietly. I didn't mention the letter to Lila right away, unsure whether telling her would comfort her or reopen old wounds. She'd adjusted so beautifully to this new life, and I wasn't about to disturb the soil her happiness was finally growing in. But children are more perceptive than we give them credit for, and a few days later she asked, "Is Daddy still mad at me?" I knelt beside her and brushed a smudge of dirt from her cheek. "He was never mad at you, sweetheart," I said gently, "but he was confused, and that made him make bad choices." She looked down at her shoes, picking at the lace. "I missed the good parts of him," I nodded slowly. "That's okay. Missing the good doesn't mean forgetting the bad. It just means your heart remembers how to hope." After some thought and a long conversation with Helen, I agreed to a monitored visit. 1 hour at a local community center, with a social worker present and Becca by my side. Aaron looked like a man who'd aged 10 years and 6 months. His hair thinner, shoulders lower, but his eyes clearer somehow. When Lila entered the room, she froze for half a heartbeat, then walked toward him with hesitant steps. "Hi, Daddy," she said, voice small. Aaron knelt immediately, tears in his eyes, but didn't reach for her. "Hi, Bug," he whispered. "I've missed you." They talked about school, puzzles, and her new sunflower garden, avoiding anything heavier. And when the hour was up, Layla hugged him gently and whispered something we didn't hear. Becca and I walked her out, leaving Aaron sitting alone with his head bowed, the clock on the wall ticking softly above him. That night, I wrote my own letter, this one for Aaron. I didn't excuse him, but I didn't condemn him either. "You broke something that may never fully heal," I wrote. "But Lila deserves to know the difference between failure and finality. If you want a place in her life, you'll have to earn it, not with apologies, but with consistency." I told him we'd allow monthly supervised visits for now, and that he'd need to enroll in family therapy if he wanted anything more. Then I sealed the envelope and mailed it before I could second-guess myself. Becca read the carbon copy I kept and said, "That was generous." I shrugged. "It was necessary. I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it for her." And that was the truth. As April turned to May, the Willow Creek house began to change again, this time not with fear or recovery, but purpose. I decided to open part of it to others. Other women who had experienced betrayal by family, who needed time to get back on their feet. Helen helped me set up the legal framework, and Becca offered to oversee the logistics, drawing from her background in nonprofit coordination. We called it the Sunflower Room after Lila's drawing, and by summer we had our first guest, a woman named Rita, whose sister had stolen her identity and left her homeless. Lila helped paint the guest room walls, adding tiny sunflowers near the window, so it feels like hope lives here. Diane brought over spare linens, and Helen donated a reading chair from her office. The house that once held secrets and silence now pulsed with life and healing. And every night, as I tucked Lila into bed, I thanked the universe that I had lived long enough to see it bloom. By the time June arrived, Lila's world had expanded beautifully. She had a stable home, a summer reading list, a sunflower bed in full bloom, and a deep understanding that love doesn't always come from where it's supposed to. Aaron continued to show up, on time, respectfully, and more father than he'd ever been. He never pushed, never crossed lines, and thanked me quietly after each visit. I didn't trust him, not completely, but I did begin to believe he was trying. Tasha, on the other hand, vanished from every radar. Her lawyer sent a brief notice that she was forfeiting her visitation rights indefinitely. We never told Lila. She never asked. On Lila's 9th birthday, we threw a garden party with cupcakes, crafts, and a giant sunflower piñata. She beamed from ear to ear, wearing a yellow dress Becca had found in a boutique downtown and a crown made of paper and glitter. Aaron attended, standing quietly at the edge of the celebration, watching her from a distance he respected. Becca caught me watching him and said, "Do you ever regret not cutting him off completely?" I thought for a moment, then shook my head. No. Cutting him off would have been easy. Holding him accountable while leaving the door cracked for change. That was the hard part. And as I watched Lila run through the garden she'd helped plant, laughter trailing behind her like sunlight, I knew the hardest parts had led to the holiest moments. What had once been broken was becoming whole. The day Lila asked if she could call the Willow Creek house home instead of Grandma's house, I cried. Not loudly, not in front of her, but later, when I was folding her laundry and came across the little note she'd tucked into her sock drawer that read, "I feel safe here." It wasn't about the house, not really. It was about what we had built inside its walls. Love that asked nothing, safety that didn't shift with moods, and the kind of truth that no court document could force. Becca found me sitting quietly on the edge of Lila's bed, holding that note like it was fragile glass. "You okay?" she asked softly. I nodded, smiling through tears. "I'm more than okay. I just never thought I'd get here." She sat beside me, laced her fingers through mine, and whispered, "You earned this." Summer deepened, and the sunflower room became more than a name. It became a refuge. Rita stayed 3 months before finding her own apartment and leaving us with a framed photo of her and her dog Max, who now ran circles around her new backyard. Our second guest, Nadine, arrived with bruises she didn't speak about and left with job offers, dignity, and a new haircut Lila said made her look like a superhero. Each woman who stayed brought something different to our home, and when they left, they always left something behind. A teacup, a journal, a crocheted blanket, a recipe scribbled on napkin paper. We kept them in a glass cabinet by the front door, our quiet museum of healing. Lila would stop and look at it sometimes, whispering their names like a prayer. "This house is magic," she told me once. I didn't disagree. Some places grow things stronger than sunflowers. One Tuesday morning, I received a letter in the mail, official-looking and sealed with a name I hadn't seen in nearly a year, Tasha. I opened it slowly, cautious as ever, and read her brief, scrawled handwriting. "Clarice, I've forfeited my rights. I know I caused pain I can't undo. I won't return, and I won't fight anymore. Tell Lila I'm sorry. If she ever wants to reach out, here's an address. If not, I'll understand." There was no anger in her words. No legal threats. Just a quiet resignation that surprised me. I didn't show it to Lila. Not yet. But I did place the letter in the back of my journal. One day, she might want it. But today was not that day. Lila's 10th birthday approached, and she wanted only one thing, a garden bench, right in the center of her sunflowers. "So people can sit and feel safe," she said, as if safety were something you could plant and water. Becca and I pooled our money and ordered a handcrafted cedar bench engraved with the words, "Where love grows, we rest." On her birthday, we unveiled it with a ribbon, and Lila cried so hard She had to sit down before we even finished singing. Aaron attended again, staying further back this time, but helping Becca serve lemonade and clean up afterward without being asked. He and I exchanged nods, nothing more, and I felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness, but release. Some wounds don't close, but they do stop bleeding. That was enough. Later that night, after the guests had gone and Lila was asleep with frosting still on her cheek, Aaron lingered by the porch steps. "She's different," he said, not looking at me. "She's happy." I nodded, arms folded, cautious but open. "She's safe." He swallowed hard, then said, "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what I almost destroyed." I looked at him, not as my son, but as a man I once raised to be better. "Keep showing up," I said. "That's all you can do now." He nodded, and for once, didn't try to argue. He just walked away into the night. Weeks passed, and life continued, not loudly, but steadily. The porch swing creaked its lullaby, the garden bloomed again, and the sunflower room welcomed another woman who cried when she saw the yellow walls. Lila began writing stories in a spiral notebook, mostly about girls who saved their own grandmothers and turned sad houses into castles. I helped her edit them, one comma at a time, pretending not to cry when she read them aloud. Becca started working part-time at the local shelter, and Helen visited for tea, now more friend than lawyer. We were a quilt made of torn pieces stitched together with fierce love. And for the first time, I no longer felt like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, because I had already lived through the fall and survived. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and cast golden shadows across the porch, Lila sat beside me with her notebook. "Grandma," she said, "I want to write your story." I raised an eyebrow. "What part?" She thought for a moment, then answered, "All of it. The part where you were sick and they left you, and the part where you got strong again, and the part where I found you." My throat tightened, and I reached for her hand. "You didn't find me, baby. You brought me back." She smiled like sunshine. "Then I want people to know that." So I let her. I gave her every memory, every scar, every truth I had buried under politeness or silence. She wrote it all down, haltingly at first, then with the unstoppable rush of a girl who knew her story mattered. She titled it "The Woman Who Woke Up," and at the bottom of the final page, she drew a sunflower and a little girl sitting on a bench beside an old woman with silver hair. "That's us," she said. "Even if someday we forget, the story will remember." I kissed her forehead and whispered, "Then that story is already a masterpiece." We sat in silence, letting the crickets sing the closing lines neither of us needed to say aloud. Because I had woken up in a hospital bed with betrayal ringing in my ears and silence choking my body. But I didn't stay there. I had been left alone, unheard, and written off, but I had clawed my way back to life. One blink, one breath, one heartbeat at a time. My son had failed me, but my granddaughter had saved me. The house that was nearly stolen became a home for many. The voice that had once been silent now told stories that healed. I was no longer the woman in the coma. I was the woman who stood, who spoke, who protected, who grew sunflowers from scars. And when my son walked into that hospital room and saw Becca sitting beside my bed, holding my hand like a lifeline, he knew. He knew exactly what he'd lost, and exactly who had taken his place. Thank you for listening to my story. Before you leave, there's another story similar to the one you just watched. You'll see it on the top left of your screen.